Serafina Voss arrived at the King's Convergence, the same way she had arrived at every important event in her life, carrying her medical bag, wearing borrowed shoes, and answering to nobody. The guard at the entrance handed her a servant's sash without looking at her face. She took it and tied it around her waist. She did not argue. She did not explain that she was a trained healer with 12 years of field experience, or that she had once saved the life of a northern pack elder with nothing but river clay and a piece of broken bark. She simply tied the sash and walked inside. The hall was enormous. 6 packs had gathered under one roof, which meant 6 sets of politics, 6 different versions of ambition, and roughly 400 people who had spent the morning deciding how important they were. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The marble floors reflected everything back at you whether you wanted them to or not. Serafina found the healer's station, unpacked her bag, and got to work. Nobody paid attention to her for the first hour. That was normal. That was, in fact, preferable. It was during the second presentation of the afternoon that a young page, no older than 14, with red-rimmed eyes and a wrist bent at a wrong angle, appeared beside her station without a word. He had clearly been told not to make a fuss. His jaw was tight with the effort of it. She sat him down behind the column where no one could see and spent 11 minutes wrapping his wrist with careful hands and quieter conversation. She did not ask him how it happened. That was something she had learned a long time ago. Sometimes people need care, not questions. When she sent him back, he walked straighter than he had arrived. She did not know that the king had seen this. She would not know for some time. The dinner that evening was arranged with the precision of something that pretended to be casual, while being anything but. Long tables, golden candelabras, a seating arrangement that communicated rank more clearly than any speech could. Serafina was placed at the far end of the secondary table, between an elderly accountant from the Eastern Pack and an empty chair. She ate her soup and listened. Lady Viveni Drayle sat at the king's right hand and wore her position like a garment she had commissioned specifically for this occasion. She was polished in the way that took real effort to maintain. Every gesture considered, every word calibrated. She was also, Serafina had noticed, the kind of person who needed the room to be watching when she spoke. The room was watching now. "It is such a comfort," Vivenne said, turning slightly toward the king with a smile that included the entire table, "to have Omega healers among the staff. They are so much more manageable than one expects. Like well-trained dogs, really. You give them a task and they simply get on with it." The table laughed. Not everyone, but enough. The sound moved through the room like a small, satisfied wave. Serafina set down her spoon. Under the table, her hands rested flat against her thighs. She breathed once, slowly, and looked at the candle in front of her. It was a tall white candle, perfectly straight, burning without any drama at all. She found it very useful to look at in that moment. Serafina Voss. The voice came from the head of the table, calm, clear, and carrying the particular weight of a voice that did not need to raise itself to be heard. Everyone turned. King Cale Ashfern was looking directly at her. He had dark eyes, and the kind of face that did not offer a great deal of information freely. He was perhaps 30 years old, perhaps older. It was difficult to tell with men who had been carrying responsibility since early youth. He had not laughed at Vivenne's comment. He had not reacted at all. He had simply waited until the table was quiet again, and then said her name. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. "The Northern Pack reported a root shortage last month. The elderflower supply lines. Do you know anything about that?" She did. She knew more about it than anyone in that room, because she had spent 3 weeks in the Northern Territories the previous winter, and had spoken directly with the Pack's foragers. She told him, not in the manner of someone performing expertise for approval, in the manner of someone who simply had information that was being requested. She was concise. She was accurate. She answered his follow-up question with 2 sentences. When she finished, the king nodded once. "Thank you," he said, and returned to his meal. The table did not laugh again that evening. Vivenne smiled the smile of a woman who was recalculating. The days that followed had a strange quality to them. The convergence was scheduled for 7 days total. Presentations, dinners, council discussions, the formal closing ceremony at the end. Serafina moved through all of it at the edges, as she always had. She treated a sprained knee, a fever, 2 stress headaches, and one case of something that was either nerves or food poisoning, and was probably both. She did her work. She did not attend any of the formal presentations as a guest. She did not introduce herself to anyone with a title. She drank her morning tea alone in the small courtyard behind the east wing, where the herbs grew along the stone walls, and nobody else seemed to think to go. Except, on the third morning, the king appeared there. He had come, he said, because one of the packmates traveling with him had a persistent cough, and he wanted advice on a remedy. This was, Serafina would later reflect, an extremely indirect way to begin something. But she answered the question: mint oil, steam, rest, and less time in the cold council chambers, and he did not leave immediately. He sat on the low stone wall beside the herb beds. He asked her about her training. She told him. He asked her about the northern territories. She described them, the ice-gray mornings, the trees that grew sideways from the wind, the way the pack healers there had developed remedies from plants that did not exist in any formal medical text, because no one had ever thought to look that far north. He listened the way people listened when they were genuinely interested, which was different from the way people listened when they were waiting for their turn to speak. She noticed the difference. She chose not to comment on it. He returned the following morning, and the one after that. On the fifth day, Elder Rowan Voss arrived. He was her mother's brother, though she did not introduce him to people that way anymore. He was a tall man, with silver hair and a warm, public smile, and he greeted Serafina in the main hall, with both arms open, calling her "dear girl" in a voice pitched for witnesses. She let him embrace her. She did not return it. Her arms stayed at her sides. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. That was the extent of it. He moved away to find more important people to speak with, and Serafina went back to the healer's station. The badge on her sash, the small copper disc that marked her as medical staff, caught the light as she walked. She pressed it between her fingers, once, and let it go. That evening, she overheard Viven in a corridor, speaking to two women from the Western Pack. She caught only fragments: her name, the word disgrace, the phrase that family, and a story that was recognizable only in the way that a portrait is recognizable when someone has painted it from a description rather than from life. The shapes were correct. The truth was missing. She kept walking. The king found the record on his own. She did not know this until later, that he had gone to the official council archives on the fifth evening and requested the Voss family documentation, that he had read what was actually there, that he had sat in his private study for a long time with the pages in his hands. He did not discuss it with her directly. He came to the courtyard on the sixth morning, and the conversation was different. He was quieter. He looked at her differently, not with pity, which she would not have tolerated, and not with performance, which she would have seen through, with something more honest than either. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, at the end of the hour. She considered the question seriously, which it deserved. "No," she said. "Thank you." He accepted this. He did not push. She thought about that later, while preparing her kit for the closing ceremony. The not pushing. She had been prepared for many responses from many kinds of people. She had not been specifically prepared for patience offered without expectation of reward. It sat in her chest uncomfortably, the way something new always does, before you know what to do with it. The closing ceremony was the largest gathering of the week. Every member of every pack was in attendance. The hall had been arranged around a central floor, with tiers of seating rising on all sides. The king would speak. There would be formal recognitions. And then, according to everyone's carefully maintained assumptions, there would be an announcement regarding the queen selection. Viven arrived in pale gold. It was a deliberate choice. She understood spectacle. Elder Rowan was in the front row. Serafina stood near the side entrance with the rest of the medical staff, her kit over one shoulder, the servant's sash still around her waist because she had worn it every day for 7 days, and no one had told her to remove it. The ceremony had not yet formally begun when Viven crossed the floor toward her. She did it in full view of the assembled hall. That was the point. "I believe there has been a seating confusion," she said, pleasantly, loudly. "The healers section is at the back." She reached out and pulled the small copper badge from Serafina's sash. The sound it made coming loose was very small. The hall was quiet enough that some people heard it anyway. Viven held the badge for a moment, then dropped it on the marble floor. The sound it made landing was small also. Serafina looked at it, then she bent down and picked it up. She did not look at Viven while she did it. She did not look at the room. She placed the badge in the inside pocket of her coat, where it would not be taken from her again. Then she straightened. The laughter came from Viven's circle first, then it spread, moving outward through the room. Not everyone, but enough. Serafina stood very still. King Cale Ashfern walked onto the ceremony floor. He moved at a normal pace. He did not look at Viven. He did not look at the room. He walked directly across the marble floor to where Serafina was standing. He stopped in front of her. He reached out and, with both hands, untied the servant's sash from around her waist. He folded it once and set it aside on the nearest chair without ceremony, as though it were simply a thing that needed to be put down. The hall had gone very quiet. Then the King of Sixpacks knelt on the marble floor. It was not dramatic. It was not performed for the audience, which is perhaps why it hit the audience the way it did. He simply lowered himself to one knee and stayed there, and the act of it was so deliberate and so quiet that the room did not quite know, for a moment, what it was looking at. "Serafina Voss," he said, "healer of the Northern Territories, daughter of a bloodline this court has not treated well, I am asking you, in front of everyone present, to stand beside me as my queen, not a candidate, not a consideration, my choice, my only choice, witnessed here by every pack under my rule." The hall was silent. 400 people, and not one of them made a sound. Serafina looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to see that there was no performance in his face, no calculation. Just a man on his knee on a cold marble floor, offering something real, waiting without pressure to see what she would do. She said, "Get up." Her voice was steady, clear. It carried the same quiet authority that it carried when she was telling someone their fever had broken and they were going to be fine. She reached down and took his hand and helped him to his feet. And in the taking of his hand she answered him, which everyone in the hall understood. The silence broke, not into laughter this time, into something that moved through the room differently. Sound without mockery, noise that had been transformed into something the room needed to release. Elder Rowan rose from his seat in the front row and moved toward the center floor with his arms beginning to open. Serafina's eyes found him. Her expression did not change. She gave him nothing. No warmth, no coldness, no invitation, just a steady look that stopped him at a distance. The king said 2 words in Rowan's direction, quietly, close enough that Serafina heard them. She did not repeat them to anyone afterward. Rowan sat back down. Viven had already left. Later, in a corridor that connected the ceremony hall to the east wing, the two of them stood alone for the first time since it had happened. The sounds of the hall were distant. The corridor was lit with wall lanterns that cast a warm and unhurried light. Neither of them spoke immediately. Then she took the copper badge from her coat pocket and turned it over in her fingers. "I am keeping this," she said. He considered that for a moment. "It seems appropriate," he said, "given that you were the only person here this week who actually used it." Something in her face shifted, small, brief, the almost smile of someone who was not accustomed to being understood and was not entirely sure what to do with it. They walked back toward the ceremony hall together, side by side, at the same pace. The council chamber was still occupied when they arrived. 8 senior officials, 6-pack representatives, a long table, and a great deal of suppressed uncertainty about what the evening had changed. Every head turned when the doors opened. Serafina walked in without waiting for an invitation. She took a seat at the table, not at the head, not at the far end. Somewhere in the middle, where the work was done. Cale sat beside her. The council watched. Some of them shifted in their seats. One man opened his mouth and then, after a look at neither of them in particular but somehow both of them at once, closed it again. Nobody laughed. The meeting began.